All right. George Pickens is an obvious breakout, according to Jake. He went with the 9th pick of round 5. He went after Cooper Kupp and DK Metcalf. He went before, not a lot of wide. Terry McLaurin. It's like 8 picks later. So is that I'll give you the other breakout too. He says Josh Downs, but George Pickens, late round 5, so 57th overall. How do you feel about that?
Are you asking them or me?
You, Jake. You.
Okay, I thought the way that you phrased it, I thought you were like, "Are you guys good with this call?" That I actually think that number could rise, especially if they wait till day 2 or 3 to add another wide receiver. So I think Pickens is going to be a very popular one. People want him last year, wanted it to happen last year, and the inconsistencies didn't lead to what we wanted. The jokes were made when he was drafted that they drafted a better wide receiver. It's just the skill set that Pickens has. He does have a skill set to be a top 20 wide receiver. Now, the quarterback situation is going to come into play, whether Fields takes over at some point. But even so, Fields just helped DJ Moore be what he was as a top 12, actually top 10 wide receiver. So I think really if they don't add anything significant, like if they don't draft round 1 wide receiver and we're like, ooh, well, maybe it'll be a little more split like it was with Deontay Johnson, I think people are going to start to come around to Pickens. And that's why I kind of said he feels obvious. I feel like that number is going to creep into the 4th, maybe even late 3rd, but definitely 4th round.
Yeah, I think late round 5 was a little later than I expected him to go, I suppose. Jamie, would you take George Pickens over any of these players? Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison, Christian Kirk?
Yes.
Yep.
Kirk is the close one for me just because I do think he's going to be a heavy volume guy in Jacksonville, knowing this receiving core, if it stays as it is, they're in play. I think it's 16 or 17, whatever pick they have in the first round to take a wide receiver. Doug Peterson talked about that. But obviously when you're talking about upside, Pickens has much more upside than all 3 of these guys. And, the only concern, it's 2 words that scare the hell out of me with George Pickens, and it's Arthur Smith, in that, he may just unfortunately not allow the number 1 receiver to be the number 1 receiver like we hope it could be, like we saw with Drake London as well. But obviously the quarterback situation that he's dealing with is a little bit better. So comparing Atlanta to Pittsburgh,
yes.
I think you got to be all in on George Pickens at the right cost. Like you don't want to, Dave said this phrase a lot. You don't want to draft him at his ceiling. So I think round 53 feels like his ceiling. Round 4, I think, is the sweet spot for him. Round 5, you just absolutely run to make that pick. That's the kind of player that you want to get. So round 4 is when he should start to be on your radar.
I like the round 5 value for sure. Tell me if this means anything to you guys. Drake London averaged 6.9 targets per game last year. Now, that was in an offense with terrible quarterbacks, and there were plenty of other guys that got targets, random guys from week to week that would have a spike in targets, but that was London's average over the year. Last season, 7 games where George Pickens had at least 7 targets. We're going to round up a 10th of a target. 4 of those games, awesome, at least 15 PPR, 4 of them 100 yards. Only one of them was a Mason Rudolph game, by the way. The other 3 were stinkers. I wonder if that's how it might end up looking for Pickens this year. Is half the games you're going to love having them, and half the games you're going to hate having them. But when you've got receivers like that, they're number 2 guys. Once upon a time, Tyler Lockett was one of those guys where half the year you'd hate having him on your team. The other half of the year you loved having him on your team because he'd have big games. I think Pickens can do the exact same thing, especially since now he appears to be the clear-cut number 1 target. And his downfield game, the way that he fights for those targets, they're contested catches. They don't look pretty all the time, but he comes down with them. I think Russell Wilson will like that a lot. And I think that Russ with Pickens could end up being a pretty good deal. We want Russell Wilson for George Pickens. I don't think I'm going to be as into Pickens if it's Justin Fields.
I'll still be in, but I think that to your point there is that's what we have with most wide receiver 2s these days. I mean, you're talking about the DK Metcalfs. Even we were just brought up Calvin Ridley, Michael Pittman last year. There's a lot of weeks where it's like they got 3 points, 4 points. I think that we have to understand that the majorities, I know Chris Olave was a wide receiver 2, but he's actually more the anomaly where, as you mentioned, 7-8 years ago, it was the reverse. So I think you just understand that those are the kind of wide receivers we're drafting as 2s these days.
Yeah, Pickens, though, I liked so many things about him, including played 4 games without Deontay Johnson. He had 75 or more yards in 3 of them. But I do wonder how we would be evaluating George Pickens if not for Trubisky or Rudolph coming in week 16 and 17. 35.5 points, 20.1 points. But up into that, he looked like a bust, like an NFL draft bust, with a sporadic, with an occasional huge game, and usually completely silent. And I also wonder if people were actually playing fantasy in Week 18, and he went and played his normal snaps, and he had no catches on no targets at Baltimore in Week 18. What we'd be thinking about Pickens. So I guess the thing that draws me back about Pickens is if you look at his career right now, there's a lot more bad than good, a lot more. And I definitely think it's quarterback related, but it also might just be his profile because he's like a 15-yard ADOT guy, which is tough. It is tough to find consistent receivers. I think he needs to lower that ADOT, be a little bit more of a complete receiver, and not just be reliant on the big play.
This draft class that he's part of, we can sit here and debate third-year receivers. Does it still matter for profiles and all those things? There's so many guys that have dealt with crappy quarterback situations. 3 that just jump off the page. He's one, Drake London's one, and Garrett Wilson's one. Like when you look at what these 3 guys are walking into this season, we thought it was going to be the case last year with Wilson. Obviously, we know what happened to Aaron Rodgers, and now these other 2 guys are getting. To whatever degree you want to say, obviously Kirk Cousins should be huge for Drake London, and we're hoping that Russell Wilson is going to be big for George Pickens. But it's also opportunity. Pickens just got rid of his toughest competition for targets, and now it's just a clear path to targets, better targets. Again, hopefully the coordinator doesn't ruin him, but everything is just pointing in the right direction. Drake London, everything is pointing in the right direction. Garrett Wilson, everything pointing in the right direction. So we're going to look back on this and say, I can go through the laundry list of what wide receivers throughout the course of history have broken out in their 3rd season. There's going to be 3 from this class, and I'm pretty confident in that. Drake London and Wilson and Pickens should be 3 of them. It's
fine. I feel like we were talking about that on draft night we love these receivers, but they went to some bad situations. It really has reared its ugly head, I guess, for those 3. I think for Olave, he hasn't had a very good situation. Dotson hasn't had a very good situation. Traylon Burks had a terrible situation. He was drafted as AJ Brown's replacement because Brown got traded that night. But we wanted Green Bay so badly to take a round 1 wide receiver, and then they took Christian Watson in round 2.
Go back 3 years, and you have Ayuk, who fell into a terrible situation. Pittman was dealing with the remaining Phillip Rivers, and then the first year of T. Higgins was first year Joe Burrow. I meant to say the first year with Joe Burrow, which was he didn't even play the full season. And now those 3 are thought of as top 15, top 20 across the board. So I think it'll be a little bit patient with this.
Higgins and Pittman. That's an interesting debate. We should get into that.
Who you like better, Jake? Pittman or Higgins?
Higgins.
Yeah, baby. That's what I'm talking about. I got crushed yesterday.
You didn't get crushed. One guy.
YouTube, the chat. There, the comments. They'd not.
Well, we could quick hit Downs with that, is because I like the fit of Downs with Anthony Richardson, which is why I liked them last year when they drafted him, and I thought Alec Pierce was pretty much done. That's why I think Downs is a nice sleeper this year. You already saw the connection before Richardson got hurt, and of course, Richardson's going to continue to be an injury risk. But I think Richardson Downs. I'm not saying that Downs is going to surpass Pittman, but I think you can see Pittman and Downs very close in fantasy numbers. They're different styles, but their numbers are going to be similar at the end of the year, and that's why I like Downs as a great late pick.
So I agree with that, but Joe Burrow's not an injury risk?
Like to the Anthony Richardson, I don't know. Are we going to, is it career or is it just past season? I mean, or past 2 seasons?
They both didn't finish their rookie seasons.
It's fair.
One guy's annually hurt all the time.
Yeah,
every summer.
It's an interesting discussion, but some people just think that mobile quarterbacks are more injury prone because they get hit more. I have read people say that the research shows that mobile quarterbacks are not more injury prone.
FB Injury Doc, he actually has a whole study he did on it, and it shows that they don't get hurt more than quarterbacks that stand in the pocket.
Right. We just have unfortunate negative views because of like RG3 and guys that have
Lamar.
long-term injuries. Well, I mean, Lamar's been
as RG3. See, he even said now he realized he should have ran out of bounds more.
Yeah.
It's just kind of common sense. It almost feels like they have to be more injured.
Well, Russell Wilson's been sort of a good example of that. When he was running, he was always running safely for the most part, and he's run less as he's gotten older, which has hurt his fantasy production. Although last year he changed it a little bit.
All right, Josh Downs went in round 11. Michael
Love
Wilson went in round 12. Jake, who do you like better, Josh Downs or Michael Wilson?
Michael Wilson by a hair, but the draft could change that, as we've been talking about.